The sea was home to all kinds of fish. When the big sea dried up, the small Aral Sea was created. The dam was built, and the water from the Syr Darya gradually filled it in.
The Aral Sea, a sea that has been slowly drying up since the 1960s, more of a salt lake than a sea, an immense continental basin that once collected water from the whole of Central Asia. At the turn of the millennium, Kazakhstan built a long dike to hold back the water in the northern part of the Aral Sea. As a geography student at the time, I followed this rebirth with enthusiasm. My name is Cédric Gras. I'm a writer and traveler, passionate about the territory of the former USSR, the little-known Eurasia I've explored for the past 20 years. Today I want to understand the fate of the Aral Sea, to understand why part of its waters have been saved in the north, while the Great Sea in the south is doomed to disappear. Where is the water that once abounded on its shores disappearing too? To track the water's journey through these deserts, I want to follow the two rivers that have fed the Aral Sea for centuries. Two powerful rivers that have enabled Central Asia to prosper, the Syr Darya to the north and the Amu Darya to the south. After following the course of the Amu Darya to the Pamir glaciers, this time I'm preparing to travel up the Syr Darya, almost 3,000 kilometers long, which rises on the borders of Kyrgyzstan and China. The Syr Darya is the only river that still reaches the Aral Sea, and its waters have enabled the fragile renaissance of the northern part of the region. Along its course, I'm going to meet the people who make their living from its waters, and who are worried about their slow decline. My journey begins in Aralsk, in Kazakhstan, where fishing picked up 15 years ago when the water returned. How long is the net?
20 meters.
What fish is that?
It's carp. Carp.
It's carp. Carp.
Yes. There's no more big sea, just the small Aral Sea.
All that's thanks to the Syr Darya, right?
Yes.
This is the small Aral Sea. It's not even 20% of the original surface of the Aral Sea. But thanks to the dike built by the Kazakhs, the water has risen, and they've been able to resume fishing here. Before it dried up, the Aral Sea was crisscrossed by trawlers and supported up to 40,000 fishermen. At the time, it supplied 1 in every 6 fish consumed in the USSR. After almost disappearing in the 1990s, water returned to the northern part of the Aral Sea. The water level rose by 6 meters in the early 2000s and fishing gradually resumed. A 100 meters from the fishing zone, I reach Aralsk, a small town overrun by sand that was once Kazakhstan's main port on the Aral Sea. Despite the dike being built, the water has not returned, and the closest shore is still around 40 kilometers away. I have a meeting in the abandoned docks with Batirkan Prekeyev, manager of fishing Kolkots, who remembers the busy port from his youth. Salam alaikum. What was this here?
This was the docks. We'd load and unload the freight.
Do the cranes date from the 1970s?
They're old cranes installed when the sea was here.
Did the big ships dock back then?
Yes. Before there were no roads. All connections with villages or islands were made by sea. The boats delivered food and construction materials. Everything happened on the water. One way or another, there was water here until 1970. This was the landing stage, the port. Ships docked here to unload fish and materials. There were no roads. Everything went by sea. But there's no more water anywhere in Kazakhstan.
What are the prospects now for the small sea?
If the water stops coming, the sea will die. The small sea is receding at the moment. There's not enough water flowing from the Syr Darya, although the sea did return for 10 years.
But these last 3 years, people have started to worry.
This last year was the hardest. We'd been holding on until then. But last year, there was very little water.
Listening to Batirkan, I realized that despite the new dike, waves will probably never return to the port of Aralsk. It's time for me to go and see this 13-kilometer-long, 10-meter-high structure that contains the waters of the Syr Darya River in the northern part of the Aral. I'd like to find out more about this undeniable success, which nevertheless seems very fragile. Azim Bey, one of the dike managers, wanted to introduce me to an old fisherman named Kontugan. He experienced the drying out, then the return of water near his village.
The wind blows on this side.
Yes, a bit.
When the big sea was here, before the dike was built, there was no water like that. There wasn't even a drop of water here. It was just black earth. And then the dike was built, then water came from the Syr Darya and accumulated here. The reeds began to grow. There was nothing here before.
So after the dike was built, life returned. The birds returned.
Yes, there are ducks, grey herons, which were perched here earlier, coots, sickle ibises, swans. There are all kinds of birds here. The creation of the small Aral Sea helped improve the well-being of the population. The number of fish began to increase. We had no other jobs. We were just fishermen. But over the last 2 or 3 years, this small Aral Sea has been shrinking again, drying up year by year. This year, the situation is worse than last year. There are no fish. People have no jobs to earn a living. The wages of those who work in the other towns are not enough to support the family left behind in the village. That's our current situation.
I didn't expect such a situation. In recent years, the media has talked up the rebirth of the Aral Sea to the point where many believe that it concerned the entire ancient sea. However, not only is the water's rise confined to the small Aral Sea, but this is now threatened by the drop-in flow of Syr Darya. So I'm preparing to go upriver to see why water has become so scarce. I obviously hope that water will continue to reach the small Aral Sea and that the story of this little sea's revival won't be just a brief celebration. But I think that's what haunts the spirits of all the fishermen here, the inhabitants of the villages and also the authorities. What haunts them is that the Syr Darya will suffer the same fate as the Amu Darya, and that the use of water upstream is such that one day there'll no longer be a drop here in the small Aral Sea. After the worry of the fishermen, it is time for me to leave the Aral seashores to go up the Syr Darya towards its source. A journey of almost 3,000 kilometers through Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and Kyrgyzstan, meeting people who live off the river. Leaving the shores of the Aral Sea, I follow the meanders that appear across an inhospitable desert. This austere immensity was chosen in the 1950s by the USSR to host its famous Baikonur Space Center. The presence of Syr Darya was decisive in their choice of site. Infrastructure was established on the right bank of the river, an essential resource for supplying the city. I decide to stop here to discover this place that symbolizes the Soviet space story. The city of Baikonur still seems to live in Soviet times. The history of the conquest of the space is omnipresent in the streets. The summer heat is torrid and the Syr Darya waters the parks, home to unusual monuments. This is the famous Soyuz rocket.
Yes, it's legendary, because the Russian cosmonauts used it a lot, as did foreign astronauts, even back in the day.
When was this rocket built?
Its first flight was in the late 60s, early 70s.
Elina Sadikova, historian, guides me through this closed city subject to authorization. The Baikonur territory is leased by Moscow and under Russian as well as Kazakh legislation. Hi.
Hello.
What are you doing here?
Nothing, just hanging.
You're resting?
Yeah.
In the shade. You know what the rocket's called?
Soyuz. Soyuz.
Exactly. Bravo. And do you know who launched this rocket?
Yuri Gagarin. Korolev.
Korolev invented it?
Korolev built it and launched it, and Yuri Gagarin flew in it.
Bravo. Most of the residents work for the Space Center. Many engineers live here with their families when needed for missions and rocket launches. At school, their children learn the milestones in the Soviet conquest of space, an epic that undoubtedly remains the greatest pride of the dismembered USSR.
You know who was the first man to fly in space? Gagarin, Yuri Gagarin. And the first woman to fly in space?
Tereshkova.
And the first man to walk in space?
Leonov.
The first woman to walk in space?
I don't know.
Savitskaya.
Oh, well done. I'm absolutely delighted to be here, because I've been fascinated by the history of the conquest of space. And to know that Yuri Gagarin, the first man in space, took off and trained on the banks of the Syr Darya, that means something. Baikonur and its 30,000 inhabitants would never have seen the light of day in the middle of the desert without the resources of the Syr Darya. Without the river, the Kazakh desert would be as mineral and arid as the surface of the Moon or Mars. I am, however, surprised by the narrowness of the riverbed. I imagine that at Baikonur, the Syr Darya is already much diminished by upstream withdrawals from the more populated regions of Central Asia. I'm back on the road through the vastness of the desert. Here, aridity is extreme, and annual rainfall tends towards zero. Despite the meandering Syr Darya, signs of life are rare in this part of Kazakhstan. My next stop up the Syr Darya is Kyzylorda. The city is one of Kazakhstan's main economic centers and is surrounded by a vast agricultural zone, an oasis as these irrigated regions are known. In particular, water-hungry rice is grown by diverting the course of the Syr Darya. Rice paddies seem incongruous in the middle of the desert, and I'm keen to find out more.
Action!
Action! Behind me is a dam built under the Soviet Union. It diverts most of the water into an irrigation canal that leads to the rice fields. But towards the end of summer, from mid-July onwards, the amount of water diminishes enormously. And it's been like this for 5 years now. This drought is causing major problems in the Kyzylorda region, with serious environmental consequences.
On the internet, I found a channel of a local YouTuber who has published a few videos on the water situation in the area. A dynamic young whistleblower by the name of German Diachenko. He asked me to accompany him on his next report. To shoot his videos, German called on Maxim, an amateur cameraman friend.
Once the river level suddenly dropped. This had never happened before. So I took my camera and I went out to film. I put it on Instagram asking if anyone knew why it was like that, and everyone replied. It's going in the fields for rice. So I kept shooting, put it online, and got a lot of hits.
You said this topic had lots of hits. Maybe that was because it worries people.
It worries a lot of people, but others just live from day to day. They don't care whether the water flows into the river or not, as long as they have enough to drink. They don't care about anything else.
As part of the story he's shooting, German has an appointment with Vil Boykov, 85 years old. This former hydraulic engineer was involved in planning major irrigation systems in the early 1950s.
I worked here in the 60s and 70s as head of the Gipromatkos mission of the Moscow Institute that dealt with water management issues. Areas were being planned to become rice fields. And of course, the first issue was water. The Soviet authorities decided that here in the Kyzylorda region, rice had to be grown to supply the entire USSR. And naturally, a question arose. Rice needs an enormous amount of water, which means taking it away from the fish. The question was simple. It was either fish or rice. We chose rice. And a gigantic area was put under cultivation. And Kyzylorda is still today the main rice granary, not only for Kazakhstan, but also for Russia.
So, that's the rice.
Yes, that's how we do it almost all season. Rice is grown like this from early spring to late summer. As soon as it is planted, the field is flooded, and only at the end of August does the water go away, just before the harvest.
In fact, the water from the Aral Sea is here. This is the water that should flow to the Aral Sea. It's water that has been retained here, that has been prevented from going further to the vanished sea. And it does seem absurd. We're in the desert, and then there are entire fields flooded. And we wonder why this mistake isn't fixed by simply changing the plants and crops here. It seems to be quite a complicated subject here in Kazakhstan. Thanks to German, I was able to see the colossal water consumption of Central Asian agriculture. I leave the rice fields of Kyzylorda behind me to continue my journey up the river. Its course winds through the middle of the heat-crushed steppe. The mercury reads almost 40 degrees. Time seems suspended in the slow movement of the water, and for a few hours I feel like I'm crossing a preserved world. It doesn't last long. 300 kilometers upstream from Kyzylorda, I discover Turkestan, a booming city. Kazakhstan is rich in hydrocarbons and is building a new city here on the model of the Persian Gulf countries. Projects with inevitable consequences on the river and its tributaries. Here, the old historic town coexists with the new town that Kazakhstan is building with great investment. I didn't expect so much opulence in Turkestan. The city, at least the city center, is covered with gardens and trees decorated with fountains. And all this water, obviously, comes from the Syr Darya via canals. Turkestan is a truly disconcerting city. It's Venice in the middle of the desert and looks like Las Vegas, Dubai or Astana, the capital of Kazakhstan. The joy of the people here is so nice to see. The Kazakhs seem to like it. On the other hand, I imagine that no one thinks about the origin of all this water. It is obvious that all this water comes from the Syr Darya, and that these gondolas, which travel on canals in the middle of the desert, do not make people think too much about the savings which might perhaps be appropriate in these regions. What is certain is that during the Soviet era, the waters of the Syr Darya were clearly opened. This caused the Aral Sea to dry up. But since these Central Asian countries have become independent, Kazakhstan, for example, we see that there's no going back. They didn't really question the decision to grow rice, for example. And now the show begins behind me, and we can clearly see that the development of Kazakhstan continues, and that they can create fountain shows like Versailles. The tableaux in this show draw on the epic of the steppe empires and the imaginary work of the Silk Roads. Like all ex-Soviet republics, Kazakhstan seeks to anchor its national narrative in a centuries-old history, even if it means allowing itself a few fantasies. But it's not so much the show as Turkestan's lightning development in the desert that leaves me doubtful. Beyond Turkestan, the course of the Syr Darya is punctuated by a succession of dams and reservoirs as it approaches the Uzbek border. I'm about to enter the Central Asian country that exploits the Syr Darya the most. Most of the water lacking in the Aral Sea disappears as it flows through Uzbekistan. I leave its course for 2 days to visit Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, a city of 2.5 million inhabitants fed by a tributary of the Syr Darya. In midsummer, its wide avenues swelter in the heat. Tashkent is an important stop on my journey, as it's here that the Interstate Commission for Water Distribution in Central Asia is headquartered. It brings together the 5 countries of the Aral Basin: Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. I have an appointment with its president, Dinara Ziganshina, a leading specialist in water issues in Central Asia.
Our population is growing fast and will continue to grow, but there won't be any more water than there is today. We are therefore approaching a water shortage. More than ever, we continue to tackle this problem head-on.
What work should we do, for example? Concrete the canals?
Yes, among other things. Canals need to be concreted over, dikes on reservoirs, and hydroelectric dams need to be renovated, and irrigation canals need to be reviewed. We're also trying to reduce the surface area of water-hungry crops such as rice, replacing them with less demanding crops like wheat. But we can't just think in terms of water and profitability, because people's lives, the traditional way of life of farmers, and the culinary habits of local people are also linked to these agricultural traditions. So we first need to find ways of keeping those who work in these water-consuming crops busy in large irrigated areas, like Kyzylorda, for example.
In Kyzylorda, German the YouTuber was astonished that rice fields hadn't been replaced by less water-hungry crops such as wheat. However, rice is a more labor-intensive crop and has a long culinary tradition. Agricultural transition will require the development of new sectors. To better understand the Uzbeks' ancestral link with irrigated agriculture, I leave Tashkent to travel along the Syr Darya in the Ferghana Valley, Central Asia's most fertile region, a valley where the borders of Uzbekistan, Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan intertwine, complicating the sharing of precious water for each country. Here the river is in demand from all sides. I can't help thinking of the fishermen I met on the small Aral Sea. Do we think of them when we allocate irrigation quotas? Do we calculate the flow that would stabilize its level 2,000 kilometers downstream? Seen from here, the question of the Aral Sea seems secondary to the needs of fast-growing countries. I'm back at the Syr Darya after taking a mountain pass, as the river flows for a few dozen kilometers towards Tajikistan. In fact, the Ferghana Valley is shared by 3 countries, Tajikistan and Uzbekistan, where I am, but also Kyrgyzstan. A total of 9 million people live in this farming paradise, and the 3 countries are obliged to coordinate their water management. The mountain springs of Kyrgyzstan are not far away, but it's in this valley that the intensive irrigation of the river begins. A whole network of canals has been dug here, particularly during the Soviet era, to ensure that every plot of land in this valley is suitable for cultivation. Today, millions of people live off these crops, which are renowned throughout Eurasia. Fruit and vegetables from the Ferghana Valley are famous not only in Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, but even in Russia and China. Since the early 18th century, the Ferghana Valley has been part of a kingdom known as the Khanate of Kokand, named after the capital where the Khan Palace still stands today. A veritable cornucopia of Central Asia, the Khanate exported fruit and vegetables as far afield as Russia and China. Irrigation was already highly developed, but it wasn't until the Soviet era that it was stepped up. In the southern part of this wide Ferghana Valley, water is piped through a main canal dug in Stalin's time. Here, the profession of irrigator is crucial, and Mohammed has long been one of the engineers directing water distribution. Why was this canal built?
Because the water ran alongside the fields. The government decided to build an artificial canal. That's how the Great Ferghana Canal was born. And it carries 1.5 million cubic meters of water. The canal is dotted with little locks like this one.
What would have been the consequences without this canal?
It would have been like 1,000 years ago. People would have lived here, but agricultural production would have been much lower. Personally, I'm grateful to our fathers and grandfathers who dug this canal. They did it in record time, 65 kilometers in 45 days. And it was all done without machines, without excavators, by the sheer force of manpower. So I'm grateful. Unfortunately, because of this, the Aral Sea has practically dried up.
Heading up the Ferghana Valley, I reach the confluence that gives rise to the Syr Darya. Here at the foot of the mountains, two major rivers meet, the Darya and the Narin. With a length of 800 kilometers and a higher flow rate, the Narin River is the main tributary of the Syr Darya. And it's this river that I'll be following to reach the river's source and the origin of the distant Aral Sea. I crossed the border with Kyrgyzstan and stopped by the roadside, by the last crops in the Ferghana Valley. Early July is the start of the school holidays, and children have come to help their parents transplant the rice. Okay, can you show me?
Take one.
Like this?
Yes, now stick it in the ground.
A long way?
Yes,
To around this depth?
like this plant, look.
I space it like that?
Yes, yes,
Is that right?
yes.
Right, off we go. I was hired by the Kyrgyz to transplant rice. I'm in Ferghana, the Kyrgyz part of Ferghana. Just above me, the mountains begin. They're arid because they're not irrigated. Then I'm going to climb them. I'm going to go up the course of the Syr Darya to the source, to these snow-capped mountains. These glaciers, which allow Central Asia to have water for crops, for men to live. The Kyrgyz mountains are a bit like the water tower of Central Asia. The trip up the Narin River is done in the company of Marat, a driver of Tatar origin, settled in Kyrgyzstan from the USSR. The landscape changes over the kilometers. On the Kyrgyz side, the water is regulated by a series of dams that become more and more impressive the higher you go. The Narin River winds its way through increasingly steep reliefs. Here, the issue is no longer irrigation, but hydroelectric energy, on which the country is largely dependent. The key dam of the Kyrgyz hydroelectric system is called Toktogul, a gigantic concrete wall in the middle of dizzying gorges, which retains 18 billion cubic meters of water in a vast reservoir. A strategic site for the country where access is tightly controlled. The authorities nevertheless allowed me to meet one of the Toktogul managers. Exceptional permission was granted, and I have the great advantage of being on the Toktogul Dam, which is a bit of the keystone of the Syr Darya watershed, at least upstream. The Kyrgyz here really control the tap, leading to a cascade of problems downstream in relations with countries such as Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. At the foot of the concrete giant, I'm to meet Medet, chief engineer of the Toktogul Dam.
We're on the lower part of the Toktogul Dam. The Toktogul hydroelectric power station represents 40% of the Republic's production. The reservoir supplies the Toktogul hydroelectric power station, but also 4 other dams downstream, which operate thanks to this vast reserve of water.
I just came from Uzbekistan, and they didn't really say it to me like that. But they complain a little that their seasons aren't the same as yours, and you hoard the water when they need it. Is that true?
Yes, but I'd like to say that we are water users and they are consumers. We use water without reducing its volume. We use it and it continues to flow downstream. Whereas with irrigation, the water disappears without return. But still, it's true that we have changed the seasonal regime of the river a little. In summer, much less water is released.
The Toktogul Dam reservoir extends over 300 square kilometers, a considerable reservoir which worries downstream countries. Thanks to this spectacular structure, Kyrgyzstan holds the keys to water, and its priorities are very clear. As Medet just explained, the dam provides 40% of all the country's electricity, vital energy for almost 7 million inhabitants, particularly in winter, when temperatures can sit at minus 20 degrees Celsius for a long time. The stakes are high. This involves filling the tank as much as possible during the year in preparation for the cold season. However, as I observed throughout my journey, it is in spring and summer that the fields downstream in Uzbekistan or Kazakhstan need to be irrigated, a conflict of use which particularly upsets the farmers of the Ferghana Valley, where I was a few days earlier. The Narin River flows in increasingly narrow valleys. After the deserts and arid steppes of Kazakhstan, from here I can see the eternal snows. I decided to go back to these sources in order to understand the origin of this water, so precious for all of Central Asia. I am happy to gain some altitude and find these Kyrgyz mountains that I love so much. I have often traveled to this country, where 95% of the territory is located above 1,500 meters, and whose highest peaks exceed 7,000 meters. From one valley to another, Kyrgyzstan changes face. Green pastures can suddenly give way to austere mineral reliefs. Next stop on my trip is a town of 40,000 souls, named after the river that crosses it, Narin. At an altitude of 2,000 meters, the water seems abundant. Yet here too we are worried. Winters are getting less and less snowy, and ice reserves are under threat. I contacted a journalist from the local newspaper, Komando Usuptegin, who regularly warns of unprecedented fluctuations in the river.
When we were little, in the 70s, there was a lot of water and snow. At this altitude, the snow was more than 1 meter thick. There isn't much left of the enormous glaciers that weighed down the mountains. Fewer glaciers, less water. In recent years, for example, we've experienced snow-free winters. Another question linked to the river Narin is at the river's source, where the Kumtor gold mine is, in the high mountains. The Narin rises at the foot of the glaciers. Some scientists say that the water is polluted by the mine, but we need additional research, which is impossible. We have no laboratories. People revolted a few years ago because the water was very polluted. It carried mud. The Sanitary Epidemiological Station took samples to estimate the rate of water pollution. The gold mine is central to the problem.
The Kumtor gold mine plains the peaks of the Tian Shan near the Chinese border. In 2022, the Kyrgyz state decided to nationalize the company, whose extraction of around 15 tons of gold per year represents up to 4% of the national GDP. The economic stakes are enormous, and ecological consequences take second place. The gold mine is located in the upper Aral Sea Valley, whose peaks are home to the headwaters of the Narin River and thus of the Syr Darya River. Access is blocked by 2 passes at over 4,000 meters altitude, making the area difficult to reach. I'm happy to venture onto these high plateaus. As I made my way up the Syr Darya, I gradually discovered the many demands made on it by agriculture and economic development. As I got closer to the springs, I realized that the water supply upstream was also threatened by climate change. It's in these high solitudes that the snow and rain that feed the Syr Darya falls. Komando, the Narin journalist with whom we discussed the drop in rainfall, knows this high valley well. He told me that yak herders live year-round in the vicinity of the springs, at around 4,000 meters altitude. I hope that one of them will be able to show me where the river begins and where my journey ends. The highest peaks in this region of the Tian Shan culminate at around 6,000 meters. For centuries, Kyrgyz nomads have driven their herds of sheep to the green pastures at altitude. Only the yaks remain in these high solitudes in all seasons. Towards the bottom of the valley, I reach a cattle pen and a hovel, where a particularly isolated shepherd lives. My host's name is Talant, and he lives here all year round and spends his days in the high pastures, tending his boss's half-wild sheep and yaks. Is that black tea?
With or without milk?
Without milk's okay. You always drink it with milk?
Yes.
Thank you. Isn't the Narin the river that flows along the bottom?
Yes, that's right.
And it originates here?
This is where the Naryn starts. Its source is higher up. The waters of the Naryn begin at the Arabel Pass. Then the river meanders around the mountain to emerge here. So the Naryn rises in this widening valley.
Talent asked me to go with him the next day to round up the yaks. The herd grazes in a valley near the source of the Naryn River. You know where your yaks are? Do they ever come down here?
In winter.
Ah, only in winter. I understand. The stirrups are a little too high here.
Oh yes, of course.
It's because I'm big. The peaks reach 5,000 meters around here.
Yes, the Soek is 4,028 meters high.
There?
At the level of the pass.
At the pass. Okay.
The Soek.
I see, I see.
I agreed to come and live here on this remote mountain pasture in 2016. I look after the yaks all year round, winter and summer. There are wolves here and you have to be on guard. There are a lot of them around and we have to cope with the atrocious cold, with temperatures dropping to 35, 40 degrees below. Every day of the year, I go out to look after the yaks. That's how we live.
Those glaciers flow onto the Chinese side?
Yes.
The valley heads east. And this is the river Naryn?
Yes, it's the Naryn.
Water is important. There's a lot in Kyrgyzstan, but far less in Uzbekistan.
Water is our wealth.
The Kyrgyz are very lucky to have this water. Are those your yaks there?
Yes.
I'll leave you here then. Is the Naryn that way?
Yes, on this side.
I'll return your horse. Thank you so much. Have a good trip.
Goodbye.
Thanks again. Travel safely. Bye. My journey ends here. Behind me are the headwaters of the Naryn River, and thus of the Syr Darya. All these peaks, these glaciers, these valleys, these streams that become rivers, they all end up in the Syr Darya, and after 2,000 kilometers, in the Aral Sea. And on its way, it allows Central Asia to live and develop. Since the start of my trip, I've heard everywhere that the climate is warming up, that the land is drying out. Talent confided that he'd noticed a retreat of the eternal snows. In these Tian Shan mountains, glaciers have shrunk by a fifth in just a few decades. And in recent years, herders have been feeling the effects of rising temperatures. This is bad news for the Syr Darya, which will get less water from its source. I observe these headwaters and imagine the fate of the drops that flow between the rocks. Perhaps some will reach the Aral Sea and give hope to the fishermen. Perhaps they'll have supplied electricity to the Kyrgyz or been lost in the crops of the Ferghana Valley. Perhaps they'll have fed the Turkestan water show, flooded the rice fields of Kyzylorda, or witnessed the takeoff of a rocket in Baikonur. One thing is certain, the water that flows from the mountains is vital to the whole of Central Asia. Faced with global warming and overexploitation of the river, countries have no choice but to work together and adapt their consumption to the flow of the Syr Darya. If Central Asia is to escape serious water shortages, it will have to improve its water management considerably. Solutions do exist, and it is now urgent to modernize irrigation systems, diversify agricultural models, and educate consumers, and to harmonize water use between different states. This transition to a more economical model will perhaps prevent the Aral Sea tragedy from being repeated elsewhere in Central Asia.